So chapter 4, we're actually going to be talking about real biology now. So we're going to start with a tour of the cell. We're already late in the day, and so I won't get through much of this. But please remember that the cell is important because this is the fundamental unit of life, right? The cell is the smallest level of organization that actually demonstrates all of the important properties of life. So a little bit of background about the cell. The cell was first recognized, though the individual that recognized it didn't recognize it as a cell. It was recognized back in 1665 by a man named Robert Hooke. And Hooke, you'll remember me telling you this from chapter 1, made in his basement a microscope, took a really thin section of some cork, and saw something that looked like this, a lattice work. Now, what we know today is Hooke was able to see the remnants of cell walls in plants. Subsequent to that, Matthias Schleiden, who was one of the individuals that formalized cell theory, looked at a whole bunch of plant tissues. And what he saw was a whole conglomeration of things like that throughout the tissues within plants. What he suggested was that plants were actually aggregates of individual beings. That there were a whole bunch of little individuals that all came together to form plants, which, isn't too far from the truth, really. If we consider the cell to be a functional unit, all of us are aggregates of these things called cells. Now, what we know about our cells and plant cells is that they're interdependent on each other. And you can't just remove one of our cells and make another person, right? That's cloning, which actually we can do, but it doesn't happen spontaneously. And then there was this other fellow, Theodor Schwann, who did the same thing in animals. So he looked at a bunch of different animal tissues, and he found similar looking structures, though the shape in animal cells was much more varied than it was in plants. And so what these two guys did is they got together, put their research together, took other people's research, and formalized it into what we know as cell theory. So cell theory states that all organisms are composed of cells. There is no level of organization that demonstrates life that can be considered an organism that isn't composed of cells, that consists of at least a single cell. Now, the grand variety of life encompasses everything from unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms, things that have trillions of cells like our bodies do. In order to be considered living, you have to demonstrate these 4 properties, right? You have to be able to metabolize, which means you consume some energy, work some biological magic to convert it to another type of energy. You have to be able to reproduce. You need to produce organisms that look much like yourself do, and that themselves can be biologically independent units. That's accomplished by the nucleic acids that we've talked about, right? You have to be able to respire. And what that means is you have to be able to take in gas, do something with that gas, and then release metabolic waste in the form of another gas. You need to be able to exchange gases with your environment. And then finally, you need to be able to be responsive to your environment. With some environmental stimulus, you have to be able to respond to that. If you're positively phototaxic, for example, that means that you have some positive attraction towards the light. So when the light is present, you move towards it. There are individuals that are able to control or moderate body temperature. When things get cold, they heat their bodies up. When things get warm, they cool their bodies down. Cells are able to do all of those things. Consequently, they are considered living. And importantly, cell theory states that all cells come from other cells. Now, there are some problems, and we'll conclude with this brief discussion. There are some problems when studying cells, because cells are incredibly small. Human cells are between 5 and 20 micrometers, which is really, really small. You can't see it with the unaided eye. And bacterial cells can be even smaller than that. So, how is it